Okay, so welcome back everybody to Sanhedrin, page 20b, although we actually possibly might get over the page today, who knows. Last week we were treated to a good shiur from Hannah on the Shamir, and at the end of last week I promised you that I would send you the results of my research into the rationalist explanations of Shamir. Sharon specifically asked for the rationalist view following the Harry Potter view. Hannah says she wants to add something. Shall we let her add something before I burst her bubble? What do you think? Julia first. Go on.
Oh, well, I wanted to say that before we go on to the rationalist Shamir, I would love to really understand what happened to Shmuel, because that's why I was looking at the the different stories, fables potentially, that related to Shmuel. I'm trying to understand.
Do you mean Shlomo or
Shlomo,
Shmuel?
sorry, to Shlomo.
Shlomo.
It's Samuel, Solomon. I'll call him Solomon, and that's easier for me. When I cannot understand, and maybe it is quite rational when you look at it in the Tanakh, but I'd like to understand how we had a whole kingdom covering the world, lost it, and then came back. And is there a rational explanation for that?
Okay, you'll have to give me time to research that.
Can I say something?
One sec, Hannah. You'll have to give me some time to research that, Julia. But I will try and do that, and we'll talk about the rationalist approach to Shlomo ruling the whole world, perhaps next week then, when I've done a bit more research. Yes, Hannah.
I had the same question as Julia, by the way, not only about the Shamir, but about Solomon losing the world. And maybe it wasn't actually losing the world, but that he threatened the sovereignty of Israel and even his empire by having violated so many of the injunctions against kingship, overexpansion into women, power, alliances, and the possessions.
I think that is what we will see, certainly if we get to it today, if not today, next week, when we start the next Mishnah, which is not very far away, because that starts to talk about the wives' business for a king. And I imagine that once I've done my research on the rationalist approach to Shlomo's kingdom, I imagine that that will come up. But we can talk about that in some detail next week then. We'll start with that next week, the rationalist approach to Shlomo's kingdom, and what that weird and wonderful, I say weird not in a negative fashion, but a weird and wonderful Gemarah that we learned last week with Hannah from Gittin 68b, which really would not have been out of place in Harry Potter. We'll see if we can bring some rationalist approach to that as well next week. Okay, Hannah, your last chance to impress me with some weird and wonderful stuff from Kabbalah.
Will you allow me to make a comment to Julia's question, despite
yes,
the fact?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
First of all, I'll talk to Julia's question. The Gemarah on 68b in Gittin goes on to talk about what after the, what was his name? The king of the Ashmedai. Yeah, Ashmedai breaks free, like he tricks Shlomo into giving him the ring and into taking off his chains, and he breaks free and he throws Shlomo to the end of the world, and Shlomo is basically left there begging and penniless, and he starts to make his way back to civilization, and he gets to the Sanhedrin as a beggar, and he claims, I am Shlomo HaMelech, And that's the first verse in Kohelet. Yeah, he quotes the first verse in Kohelet, and they don't believe him. And then one of the Tanaim says, but if somebody's making up a story, they're not consistent. And this person who claims to be Shlomo HaMelech is being very consistent in everything he says. So they go to the queen and they say to the queen, is Shlomo visiting you? And she says, yes, he is visiting quite regularly and frequently. So so they said, the next time he comes, have a look at his feet. And a little bit later, they come back and they say, no. And she says, he wears stockings. And so they bring this beggar into Ashmodai, who's pretending to be Shlomo, because he ostensibly took Shlomo's place. He made himself look like Shlomo, and he took Shlomo's place, and they bring him in, and as soon as they bring him in, he disappears. He vanishes. And so they realize that, okay, they've got Shlomo now, and they bring Shlomo back, and that's where the idea or the explanation that the Gemarah gives of Shlomo came back and took over his kingdom again. But
okay, let me just clarify one bit of that story, which perhaps just needs a bit of explanation. Why did they ask his wife to look at his feet? What were they looking for?
Because demons have three clawed feet.
Yeah, Ashmedai had feet that looked like duck's feet. So what they wanted to know was this person who says he was Shlomo, did he have normal feet? And the wife said, well, I don't know, because he's got socks on. So that's just that little bit about that. Okay, right, enough of all that.
Now, the bit that I was going to say, that finishes off the Shamir and Harry Potter, is that they had to keep the Shamir wrapped in cotton wool and in a lead box, because anything else, the Shamir could split open and leave. So he had to be wrapped in cotton wool and kept in a lead box. And that's the end of the story with Harry Potter and the Shamir.
Okay, so now I'm going to show you, I sent round a little document. I don't know if you've got it. I'll put it on the screen in a minute. And interestingly, Hannah, my source number 5 to prove my point is exactly the point that you've just used to prove your point. So it shows you how things can be interpreted. Let's have a look at the rationalist approach to the Shamir. Let me share the screen with you. This is what I sent around to you earlier on today. It's on the Leon Bennett group. So if you want to look at it at a later date, it's there for you. But it's right on the screen now. So you will see the first thing I want you to notice from my source sheet is that this is not made up by Lieberman, right? This is these are people who my rabbi in Manchester would say these are Jewish men, right? You can rely on them. They're good Jews. We're talking about the Ibn Ezra. We're talking about the Ralbag. We're talking about the Rambam. We're talking about the Abarbanel. So, you know, we're talking about top draw people. And it's important that I'm not just saying that just to, to bolster my argument. But what I'm saying is that there are those people, for example, like Hannah, who are inspired by Kabbalistic type of things and those kind of more esoteric things. And there are other folk like me who don't understand any of that at all and struggle with it. And because I suppose because my background is scientific, I am much more inspired by the idea that HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world in an ordered fashion. And I don't need, if you like, I suppose that's what I'm saying. I don't need, and not only do I not personally need, I don't like miracles when we don't need them. And the person who is, if you like, my favorite Perush in this idea is the Ralbag, which is on number 2. But let's just do number 1 first. The Ibn Ezra. The Ibn Ezra says very simply that the Shamir is an Even Chazak Ma'od. It is a very hard stone. So what do you use today to cut things that are very hard?
Diamonds.
Diamonds. So he's saying, I think, that Ibn Ezra is saying that the Shamir is some kind of stone like a diamond. We have diamond cutters, yeah? If you buy a very good tile cutter, my wife's into mosaics, so she has these tile cutter things. The best ones are, they call them diamond cutters, you know, because they've got a bit, I don't know whether they've got real diamond in, probably not. But anyway, the idea is that diamond can cut through anything. So according to the Ibn Ezra, nothing magical about the Shamir at all. It's just a very hard stone. Now, the Ralbag is my favorite. Now, we've come across the Ralbag before. We've come across the Ralbag very famously in our shiur, not this one, but in the Tanakh shiur many moons ago. And I'll remind you of it in a minute, because it happens to be one of my favorite explanations of the Ralbag. Who was the Ralbag, first of all? Rabbi Levi ben Gershom. He was French, and he lived in, I think, 13th, possibly 14th century. And he was a scientist. He was an astrologer. And he's a super rationalist. And he says, look what he says. He doesn't actually speak about the Shamir specifically, but look what he says. Haralbag to'ein, the Ralbag claims, ki ein lahavin divrei chazal ki pshutam. You do not need to, or you shouldn't understand the words of the sages literally, ki pshutam. They're not to be taken literally. Im yesh bahem stira leseichel. If they go against reason, okay, if they contradict reason, if the Chazal say something which doesn't make sense, says the Ralbag, then it's not to be taken literally. Ella, rather, yesh lechapes lahem, you should look for ta'am tiv'i or hegioni, a natural or logical explanation. And that, in a nutshell, is my personal position. Now, I fully accept that there are other people who don't hold of that position. But what I find, and I'm not speaking about Hannah now, chas v'chalila, but what I find is that there are many people who are of the mystical variety who poo-poo the rationalist approach. And they say, no, if you don't believe all of this stuff, you're an apikoros. I don't think the Ralbag was an apikoros. I don't think I'm an apikoros. I don't know enough to be an apikoros. You have to be very knowledgeable to be an apikoros. But I don't think that the Ralbag was an apikoros. This is an approach which is a reasonable approach. And this is a beauty for me. This is one of the beauties of Judaism, is that it isn't one size fits all. There are those people who are very spiritual. There are those who are very practical, who get a real kick out of the minutiae of halacha. And there are others who are much more esoteric, much more ideas-based rather than pragmatic-based. And it's not one size fits all. And that is the beauty of Judaism, that you can find something that is inspirational to you in all sorts of different ways. And for me, the Ralbag is where I'm coming from. I don't take the words of the Chachamim literally if they don't make sense naturally or logically. We should try and find a reason. He says, interesting, he says, lechapes, you should try and seek. That doesn't mean you'll find it, but you should try and find a rational explanation. And we'll look at a bit, we'll go back to the Ralbag on Tanakh in a minute when I get there. I forgot
Johnny,
to
may I add one thought? May I add one thought on that?
You may, but let me just say one thing that I forgot to say right at the beginning. I want to dedicate this shiur to the memory of my grandfather, whose yortzeit it is today, Yaakov ben Asher, who I'm named after. It's his 84th yortzeit today. He died in 1941, aged 51. half a year before my father's bar mitzvah, and by all accounts from my father and my aunt, he was a very special person, and I'm very sad that I never got to meet him, but it's his yortzeit today. And since my father and my aunt are no longer here, it's now down to the next generation to recognize his yortzeit, and that's me, and so me and my cousins Jeffrey and Marcel. So today is his yortzeit, and I dedicate the shiur to his memory. Yehi zichro baruch. Yes, Sharon.
Amen.
May his memory be for a blessing.
Thank you.
Amen.
My grandfather was the same. He died just on my father's 14th birthday, and I never got to know him, obviously. And he was a great man, and we also keep his memory alive in the family. I was just going to say regarding the Rambam, that I tend to be the more rationalist approach, though I have a side that appreciates the mystical when I can learn from it, as opposed to just accepting the truth of it being mystical. Often the truth that the mysticism reveals is significant, and you can be rational in your approach to the facts, but you can also extrapolate lessons from it, whether through rationalism or through mysticism. Rationalism doesn't cancel mysticism. Mysticism sometimes cancels rationalism, and that's when I run into trouble.
I would agree 100% with that. That's exactly my position. And in fact, that takes us very nicely onto source number 3 on the screen, which is the Rambam, Maimonides. Of course, Rambam is famous for being a rationalist. And that is exactly the Rambam's approach, Sharon. If you have a look at what I've written here, you should know, this is from Moreh Nevuchim, Guide to the Perplexed. One of these days, Bezrat Hashem, we're going to learn Moreh Nevuchim together. It's one of my I don't know, what's the word, goals in life is to teach Moreh Nevuchim, largely because I want to learn it properly. I have learned it once before, but not properly. And the only way to learn something properly is to teach it. So one day, please God.
Thursday morning, Johnny. What's wrong with Thursday morning?
Well, we could maybe. I was talking to somebody just yesterday about when I'm going to pack in my work, my real work that I get paid for, which is probably going to be in a couple of years. I don't know. But whenever it is, that's probably be a good time to start. But anyway, maybe before that. Let's see. Anyway, the Rambam says in Moreh Nevuchim, Guide to the Perplexed, he says, you should know, ki lo kol ma shene'emar ba'agada hu kipshuto. Not everything said in Agadah. Agadah is the same word as Haggadah, meaning stories, telling over. Not everything that is said in the stories of Chazal is to be taken literally. Harbe me'advarim, many of these things, ne'emru derech mashal v'chida, are said by way of metaphor and parable, which is exactly what Sharon has said. In other words, they are said in order to teach us something. What is a parable? A parable or a metaphor are just two different ways of teaching us things through story, through language. And that is how I see most of the Aggadic stories, which are, if you like, fantastic in its literal explanation of the word fantastic, sort of difficult, incredible, difficult to believe. So for me, I'm looking, as Sharon said, I'm looking, what can I learn from this? There are those who take all of the Agadah literally. I have a big problem with that, but if that's what they find sorts them out, that's absolutely fine by me, as long as you don't force me down that road. So that's the Rambam's approach, a very rational approach. Again, the Rambam doesn't say anything about the Shamir. Now, the Abarbanel, number 4, does say something about the Shamir, and he says like this: Hakatuv madgish, the pasuk emphasizes. Madgish means to stress. Stresses shalon nishma patish, that there was not heard the sound of a hammer or clay barzel or an iron tool, babayit, in the house. Which house is he talking about?
The temple.
The temple, Beit HaMikdash. Why? L'ramez al shalom utahara, to symbolize, to hint to us about peace and purity, because iron or metal, let's call it metal tools. Metal tools were used primarily for war, right? We have it in Yeshayahu, don't we? Famous verse in Isaiah, which says in the days of Mashiach, what will happen? They will
beat their swords into plowshares.
Beat their swords into plowshares. Okay, in other words, those metal objects which are used for war will be beaten into different things. They'll be reshaped into something which is peaceful. But generally speaking, metal is used for war. Metal tools is used for war. And we don't want any kind of war hinting in the Bet HaMikdash. So they weren't allowed any metal tools. Tahara, purity, of course, that's very important in the Bet HaMikdash. What is metal got to do with Tahara and Tumah, with purity and impurity? Why should metal be a problem with regard? We understand about the war business, but what about Tahara and Tumah?
Metal, I think, conducts Tumah, and it's the same thing in a sukkah. You can't put the schach. You have to have. You can't put metal bars there. You use wooden bars. I conclude from that. I haven't learned it or anything, but it's probably that metal conducts Tumah, and
yeah,
so
you're right. You're right in that. Metal tools conduct Tumah. If you had a stone with some iron ore in it, one of the very few things I remember from my geography in school is that iron is found in stone, and it's called iron ore. If you have this iron ore, you have a piece of stone, that would not conduct Tumah because it's a natural thing. But once you start to make something of it, and it's a man-made keli, then it is what we call mekabel tumah. It conducts tumah, as Hannah said. So we want to avoid all of that in the Bet HaMikdash. And so what this story says, the Abarbanel, what this story of the Shamir is telling you, it's emphasizing that there was no metal tools used in the Bet HaMikdash. And he says very clearly, Ein tzorech, there is no need, lomar, to say, shenaseh hadavar b'derech nisi, that this was done through some miraculous way. It's just to tell you that there was no metal tools used in the Bet HaMikdash for the reasons that we've just said. Okay, so now then,
Johnny, aren't you backing into that? Isn't the halacha of what is purity and impurity something that is maybe developed more after that? And to me, what I've always thought of when I've read those directions, building directions, is that if you use metal, you can strike in anger, that the laborers could be forced and be doing this work angrily and with bitterness, even if they're building a sacred building. But that the concept was that the builders should not be striking it with anger, that the whole thing should be done with fellowship and a sense of sanctity and purity. And that the metal is in that way symbolic. Also, usually metal is alloyed. It's a combination of things as opposed to, something pure as in nature, so that it's mixed and impure.
Okay, I think that the first part of what you said is absolutely well known and understood and correct. And in fact, the pasuk in the Torah tells us why shouldn't you use metal? Because you make swords out of metal. So that's the first bit. Is very clear that it's metal is something which can be used in war or in anger, as you say. The laws of Tahara were already understood by the time the Bet HaMikdash was built. Remember, the Bet HaMikdash was not built until the time of Solomon, and the laws of Tahara were given by Moshe. So they were in existence. But I agree with you that the primary reason, it seems to me, for not having metal in the Bet HaMikdash is because metal can be used in as a weapon, either in war or in anger. I agree with that. So we come now to number 5, which is the source that Hannah quoted earlier on, and that is that this Shamir, whatever it was, and it says davar shechotech avanim beli maga metachti. It is something which cuts stones without metal contact. Samu betoch tsemer gefen. It had to be wrapped up in cotton wool. V'oferet, and lead. Kedei shelo yifgom kol davar, that it should not damage anything. Now then, in our day and age, what do we wrap in lead?
Radioactive material.
Radioactive material. Therefore, what some of the Mefarshim say, based on this Chazal, is that this Shamir was some kind of radioactive material which had abilities to cut through stone. Not necessarily something miraculous, although of course everything in the world is miraculous. The fact that there is a world is miraculous, etc., etc. I'm not, don't quote me as saying the whole world isn't miraculous. It is, but not super miraculous, over and above what we would call nature. So it's interesting, isn't it, that Hannah quotes this Shamir being such a dangerous or precious or gentle or something that needs protection. Either it needs protection or we need protection from it. And the rationalists can look at the same thing and say, this must be some kind of radioactive material, because they knew what to do with that. In order to protect the world from it, we have to cover it in lead, which is what we do with radioactive material.
There was something that I read, but I've forgotten who and where, that there was a thought that it was something radioactive, but I didn't put it together. I must admit, I didn't put it together with the lead. I couldn't understand why they thought it was maybe radioactive, but now that you've explained it, it's a lot clearer.
Yeah, I think that fits, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then just to show you that I'm not a complete one-track mind, I brought you number 6 from the Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, which says Hashamir nivra bein hashmashot. It was whatever it was created bein hashmashot. Now bein hashmashot is
Twilight.
What? Twilight. Which particular twilight are we talking about here, Johnny?
I'm not sure.
So
the twilight of the first day of creation.
I don't think the first day of creation.
Sorry, just before Shabbat. Sorry,
yes,
it was the twilight just before Shabbat.
Correct.
Yeah.
The last day of creation. Chazal say that all the weird and wonderful and miraculous things like Moshe's stick and all the sort of the
hole that Korach fell into.
And the hole that Korach fell into. Yeah, all of these things, these miraculous things, were created by God, whatever this means, just before Shabbat. Between sunset on the 6th day of creation and nightfall when Shabbat began, this sort of Bein Hashmashot, this sort of weird and wonderful time, was the time when all of these funny things were created. V'godlo kegris shel chita. And I think Hannah mentioned this as well. Its size was like a barley seed. It was this tiny little thing, this Shamir, umafatzech et avanim, and it was it could split stones. Okay. Now then, the final one is a modern commentator, Yehuda Felix, and he says like this: Hashamir ulai haya chomer tzimchi chumtzati. Maybe it was some kind of acid, some kind of plant-based acid, or technikat chituch atika she'avda, or some kind of ancient cutting technique that has since been lost. So if we take the first thing, the plant-based acid, you would look, any of you ever remember in school doing your chemistry experiments with concentrated sulfuric acid? And
Yes, but it's very difficult to control.
Exactly.
And you can't, it's very difficult to control a liquid. And the Shamir was very, very accurate. It says very specifically in the Gemarah that they used to draw the letter and then put the Shamir there, and it cut it exactly.
Okay, so I could certainly envisage some kind of syringe-based instrument with a very fine nozzle with some kind of ancient acid that would cut through various things like sulfuric acid. I could certainly perceive of that. And this is an interesting thing that the Yehuda Felix says, which is an ancient cutting technique that's since been lost. We think of ourselves as being dead clever nowadays, don't we? We can do all sorts of things, and we think that all the people back then were idiots. But if you've ever seen, just look at the kotel. My son Dan, who's here from Australia, went off to Yerushalayim at the crack of dawn this morning to daven shacharit at the kotel. Sent me a beautiful picture of himself at the kotel this morning, davening with his tefillin and talis on. And in the background there are these huge stones of the kotel. You can't help standing in front of the kotel, looking at those huge stones, the way they're inlaid there, which are called Herodian stones, by the way, because that was a very specific technique that Herod used. How on earth did they do that without any of the equipment that we've got? They were very clever folk. Maybe they had some kind of ancient technique that has since been lost. I could certainly envisage of that. Yes, Julia.
Well, I was just wondering, because my son mentioned this in the context of the pyramids, but isn't there a thought that people were bigger and stronger a long time ago?
Well, I think the general understanding is people were smaller and less strong back then. It's only actually 100 years ago that the average height was 5'7", and now the average height is 5'9" or whatever it is. We are because of nutrition and vitamins and all that other stuff. We are definitely bigger. Anthropomorphically, whatever the word is, we are definitely bigger and stronger than we used to be. Moshe Rabbeinu was 30 amot high, according to one midrash. I don't know whether Hannah believes that to be true. Literally, I don't. I just think it means that Moshe Rabbeinu was of a man of enormous stature, not necessarily 30 amot high. I think probably the rationalist in me would say, no, that's probably not right, Julia. Yes, who's got their hand up? Hannah has got her hand up.
Let's do this last thing. I was once watching a documentary on TV about Japan, and apparently the Japanese used to have, and still know, of a technique of building very solid and very stable buildings without the use of nails or metal or anything, just the way they put the wood together. This goes to the ancient cutting technique business, that maybe there was something ancient, an ancient way of doing things that we have lost. And
which the mystic might say is a miraculous thing that doesn't exist anymore, and that would be fine. The rationalist would say it was an ancient technique that has been lost. This is just a good example of how different people can understand things differently, and one person should not, I suppose, criticize another person's way of thinking. I'm only joking when I have a go at Anna when saying all this Kabbalistic thing. You know that, by the way. I hope you know that.
I'm glad you said that, because I had a couple of comebacks for maybe off the recording.
Okay, we can have a friendly debate about it. No, but the serious
when they built the Mishkan, Johnny, that was a work of art, wasn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, some of those things,
that was even earlier.
Yeah, you look at some of the ancient stuff that that is available in all sorts of museums across the world. We're not the first generation that was very clever and very able. That is absolutely for sure.
There's also the lost city, the lost continent of Atlantis that was supposed to be.
The hanging gardens of Babylon, the pyramids, all of these things. We mustn't think of ourselves as being the most sophisticated that there's ever been. So
Can I just say something about the Abarbanel? Can I?
Yeah, go on. You can have one go at the Abarbanel, and then we're going to call it a day.
Now, I was just saying, the way you say that people can interpret things differently, the second sentence there's no need to say that this was accomplished through a miracle. You understand it in a rationalist form that we can say it was accomplished through rational means, whereas when I first read it, I read it as saying, of course, there's no need to say it was accomplished by a miracle. It's as clear as day that it was accomplished by a miracle. And both of us are looking at the same sentence and interpreting it completely opposite.
Okay, that's interesting. You're reading that as ironic, as in there's no need to say it because it's dead obvious. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't read it like that. Anyway, what the point? I think this has been a very interesting discussion because it shows us that it's not one size fits all, and there should be something for everybody when it comes to Judaism. And one of the objections that I have today about my own education growing up, and more than when I was growing up until I was really, well into middle age, if you like, is that I was only ever taught one approach to Judaism. And I can't say that it altogether satisfied me. I can't say that I was altogether inspired by it. Now, there are other people who had the same education who were super inspired by it, and that's fine. But it didn't do it for me largely. And it's really for me more in the last 15 years that I have been much more inspired by finding, almost by mistake initially, and then having found it, going into it in great detail, a different approach to learning, a different approach to Jewish texts, a different approach to Judaism altogether. And I think it's important that we recognize that there are different types of people and that there are different types of learning that suit different people. Of course, when you're in school, you have to do what you're told and you have to go to the lessons you're told to go to. As an adult, there's all sorts of things you can choose. You can come to my shiurim if you like my style, which clearly you do, else you wouldn't come. Or you can go to others, which you do, which might be different. And so it's there and available. And the important thing is that there is something out there for everybody. This is what I say. It's a bit said tongue-in-cheek, but I think there's some truth to it. And that is, if a person cannot find within the spectrum of Judaism something which suits them, that's a problem with them, not a problem with Judaism. They haven't looked far enough, or there's a problem with them. And on that point, we will go back to the Gemarah, I think, having had a very interesting discussion about the Shamir and various things about it. Let's go back to the Gemarah. We're going to start a new subject now. There is the Gemarah on the screen for you now. We are on page 120 in the Steinsaltz. If you are following, there it is on the screen, our little S symbol, meaning we're starting a new subject. And what we're quoting now is, this is a bit frustrating to me, because the Mishnah says lots of different things. I'll show you them back in the Mishnah in a minute. And then the Gemarah quotes a piece of Mishnah and then goes on to explain a different piece of Mishnah, which I find frustrating. But that's what happens because you're meant to know, of course, what comes next. The Gemarah quotes the Mishnah that says, Poretz lasot lo derech. A king can breach the fences of anybody and go through their field if he wants to make a way for himself when he's going out to war. Okay? So in other words, if the way down to Gaza happens to be through my back garden, the king or the chief of staff, I suppose, has permission, according to the Mishnah, doesn't have to go round my garden. He can go right through it and doesn't have to ask my permission for it. That's what the Mishnah says. And then the Gemara goes on to explain a completely different bit of the Mishnah. So let's go back to the Mishnah and see what's going on. There is the Mishnah on the screen for you now. And here's the bit that he quotes. Okay, he quotes the Gemara quotes that. Uporetz lasot lo derech. He can make a breach in the a pathway for himself. Ve'ein memache biyado, and nobody can object. Derech hamelech ein lo shi'ur. There's no minimum or maximum width of this path. He can make it however big or small he wants. And then the Mishnah says, V'chol ha'am bozazin. All the people take the spoils of war. V'notnim lo, and he give it to the king. V'hu noter chelek, and he takes the first portion. Barosh, he takes the first portion. So what the Gemara is now going to explain is actually this piece of the Mishnah, right? V'chol ha'am bozazin v'notnim lo. So why does the Gemara quote that bit of Mishnah? And the truth is, I don't know. I have no idea, because it doesn't make sense. Because really, that's a full stop. I mean, I know we don't have any full stops in the Mishnah, what have you, but that is the end of a topic. Breaching through the pathway and the spoils of war are two separate topics. So I'll be honest, I don't really understand why this Gemara starts quoting this piece of Mishnah, but it does. So we'll go on now and see what the Mishnah is actually, the Gemara is talking about the next bit, which is the spoils of war. That's what we're going to talk about now, are the spoils of war. Now, there is a health warning on this, okay? We may end up touching on some rather touchy subjects about who goes to war and all that stuff. I don't want to go there in this shir, all right? I don't want to get into any discussions about who signs up and who doesn't sign up. It's not for now. I don't want to get sidetracked in the Gemara. Anybody that wants to debate that with me privately, I'm very happy to do so, but I don't want to do it in this forum. We could easily get drawn into that with this Gemara, and I don't want to do so. So let's, with that said, let's have a look what the Gemara says. Tanu Rabbanan, the sages taught, we learnt, Otzrot Melachim Lamelech. Otzer, what's an Otzer? Anybody know?
The treasure.
Yeah, it's a treasure house. Yeah, the Otzer is a treasure house, and the Otzrot, that's what's in the treasure house. So Otzrot Malachim, the treasures of kings. Here we're talking about what used to happen, unfortunately doesn't happen in today's wars, is that in the olden days, and not that long ago, when there was a war, there was usually a clear winner and a clear loser. And certainly in biblical times and beyond, when you had a war, there was a winner and a loser. And there is an expression in English: winner takes all.
Takes all.
Yeah, we heard that expression, winner takes
Yes.
all. And this is where it comes from. This is where it comes from. Because winner takes all means that when you have a battle about anything, the winner takes all and the loser gets nothing. It's an all or nothing situation. And that's how it was back in the day with wars. You know, King A battles.
Even very recently.
Yeah,
I mean, the
that's what I said.
Second World War, there was a winner and a loser. The
Correct.
Korean War, there was a winner and a loser. The Vietnam War.
Well, I'm not so sure
There
about
was
the
a-
Vietnam War.
Why, the Vietnamese won, the Americans lost.
I'm not sure there were any winners in the Vietnam War, but anyway, certainly today, where we have what is now known as asymmetric warfare, it's very much more difficult to see who are the winners and who are the losers. But back in the day, Hannah is right, and it's not all that long ago. You know, 6-Day War, there was a clear winner and a clear loser. At the end of the day, probably in the Yom Kippur, there was a clear winner and a clear loser, but not as 100% clear as it was in 6-Day War. But anyway, certainly today.
The Lebanese War, there was no clear distinction in the first Lebanese War. Yeah, did we win or did we lose?
Exactly.
Nobody knows.
There's a good example of the first Lebanon War. But anyway, back in the day, there was a clear winner or loser, and it was winner takes all. So when they won the war, when the King A, who was battling King B, won the war, the treasure houses of the king, the things that belonged to the king, they go automatically lamelech. They are kept by the winning king. They are not split amongst the people. The treasures of the king go to the winning king. So in other words, the treasures of the losing king are kept by the winning king. Why is that? Why do you think that should be the case?
Just to show who's boss.
The boss.
Show that we've won.
Show who's boss. Okay.
Shows who we've won.
But why doesn't the king give it to the rest of the people? Why does he keep it for himself?
Not for himself.
That's a question. Not obviously why they take it. You're right. They take it because, you know, we've won, so we're having it. But why the treasures of the king are kept specifically by the king? It may well be that some soldier or other is the actual one who goes into the palace and captures the treasure house, but it's not him that keeps it. It's the king. It goes to the king. Why? Leslie, are you going to tell us why?
Well, I was going to say, presumably, as the previous king had the treasures, it should only be correct that the king who won should keep those treasures himself.
I would say that because the king needs the money for, he would have expended money in fighting a war, and therefore the treasures of the other king should go to the coffers.
Not sure that's what it says, Julia. I mean, you're right that it costs money to go to war. I read this Gemarah to say that it doesn't go into the coffers, and it actually goes into the personal treasures of the king. Maybe I'm reading it wrong.
Steinsaltz says on the left, Johnny, that he gave half to paid the soldier.
No, that's the next bit of Gemarah, Johnny.
Oh, sorry, okay.
That's the next piece of Gemarah.
Okay.
I think Leslie's along the right lines, I think. I'll tell you what, the art scroll has a little has a note here. If I can just find it. I read it earlier on today. Where did I find it? Hang on. Previous page, one sec. The art scroll says, yeah, here we go. It's only fitting that royal treasures be given to the king, who will continue to preserve them and make use of them as royal treasures, rather than divide them among commoners who would not use them in such a manner. So what he's saying is that if you go into the treasure houses of the king that you have vanquished, let's say, and you find a Fabergé egg, right? A Fabergé egg, a most beautiful, exquisite piece of art, right? Whatever it might be. A king is likely to keep that and preserve it as a beautiful treasure and a piece of art. Give it to a commoner and he's going to flog it so that he can get the money and use it for something else. He's not going to, this is what, Michael Krauss is turning his nose up at it. I'm only quoting this art scroll footnote, so it's not Torah Sinai, Michael.
He's hoarding it.
Well, he uses the word preserve, and I think that's a nice word. He's saying that the king is likely to preserve treasures in a manner befitting the treasures, and a commoner is more likely. I mean, how many times have there been found in attics, brilliant works of art which have been, just shoved in an attic somewhere and or used for some other purpose and not been recognized for what it is. I think that's a reasonable, what do you think, Leslie? You think that's a decent explanation?
I like it. very much
Okay. Leslie liked it. It's good enough for me. Right. All right. So that's why the king keeps the king stuff. Now, let's go on to the next bit, which is what Johnny was referring to. Usha'ar biza, and the rest of the spoil, i.e. the stuff that's not in the king's treasure houses, not the, you know, the art on the wall in Windsor Castle, and not the Fabergé eggs, but all the other stuff.
Crown jewels.
And not the crown jewels, yeah. Yeah, crown jewels is a good example, Anna. You can imagine, you know, somebody gets the crown jewels, he's going to break it up and flog this diamond off to that one and flog that diamond off to the other, and you've lost, you know, you've lost a beautiful treasure. So that's a good example, Anna, the crown jewels.
Golden toilet that was stolen not so long ago.
Say that again, Michael.
The golden toilet that was not stolen not so long ago and broken up into pieces.
Yeah, I'm not so sure about a golden toilet. You know who sits on a golden toilet? Somebody who's got piles of gold.
Oh, that was bad.
Okay, Ushar Biza and the rest of the spoils, i.e., not the crown jewels, Shabozazin, which they take, which the army take. Look at this. Mechza la melech. Half of it goes to the king, and I assume that is the bit that goes into the coffers, right? That goes to the king for the coffers. Umechza la'am, and half of it goes to the people. Now, if we just stop there and we don't look at any of the meforshim, don't look to the left-hand side there that Johnny's already looked at, and it just says half goes to the king and half goes to the people, what would you understand by that? Johnny's not allowed to answer this because he's looked at the side. Anyone who's not looked at the side,
the soldiers who fought in the war.
Why would you think that, Michael?
Because that's the way it always was. They got a cut of whatever was taken.
All right. See, I didn't read it like that initially. You're right. That is what the explanation is. The explanation is that when it says mechze la'am, it means half goes to the people who did the fighting, plus the people who were at home guarding. Okay? Not just the combat soldiers, but those who are at home doing guard duty.
That's what David said after they came back to Ziklag.
Very good, Hannah. Very good. Just give me a second and I'll show it you on the screen. I've got it ready for you. Exactly that. You've preempted me there. So when I first read this Gemarah, I thought half to the king and half to his subjects. In other words, the whole people. But it's not. What it is the half that goes to the people is only those who are involved in the fighting or who are ancillary to the fighting and enabling those to fight, staying at home and doing the guarding. And we'll look at the language that David HaMelech uses in a second. And of course, this is where we could get into our discussions, where I don't want to get into, as to combat soldiers and not combat soldiers. But here, the halacha is, and you can see now you're allowed to look on the left-hand side of the page, what Rav Steinsaltz says, and he quotes the Rambam, Hilchot Malachim u Milcham Teichem, the halacha of kings and their wars. I'm going to show you that inside now. Let me see if I can show you that. I've got that ready here. I think here it is. Yes, here it is. This is the Rambam. This is Maimonides in Mishnah Torah, the Rambam's, one of the Rambam's greatest works, Mishnah Torah, chapter 4, Mishnah 9. Have a look over here. Kol harugei melech. Anybody executed by the king, mamonan lamelech. The property goes to the king. So if anybody is rebels against the king, their punishment is death. The king gets their property. There's a bit of a problem with that. What's the problem with that?
Well, he may want to put people to death just because he wants their property.
Correct. Where do we learn that from?
Oh,
Isabel and Achav.
no.
Again, Hannah, say that again.
Isabel and Achav.
Correct. Yeah, Achav. In which story?
When he wants the vineyard.
Yes.
He wants somebody's vineyard.
Yes. Can you remember what his name was?
No.
Yes, does begin with a nun, correct. Okay, David, you've been very quiet today. I have to get you to do some work.
Naboth.
Navot, correct. The vineyard of Navot. We learnt it a few weeks ago, actually, on the screen, I think. What happened was Achav, the king, wanted this vineyard of Navot. And Navot said, I'm not selling. It's my historical property. It's my, what's the word I'm looking for?
Ancestral.
My ancestral property, that's right. My achuzah, I don't want to sell it. And he gets really upset. Achav goes into a complete depression about this. And his lovely wife, Jezebel, says, don't you worry, my darling. I'll sort it out for you. What does he do? What does she do? She gets some trumped up charges against Navot. Navot is accused of something he didn't do. He gets put to death. And lo and behold, his vineyard goes to the king, to Achav. And Achav is a happy fellow, and we all live happily ever after, except we don't, because Navot is dead, and Achav and Isabel get their just desserts later on. But that shows us our story. Yes, Anna.
What happens with that in the Jubilee year? In the Jubilee year, all land is supposed to go back to its original family. What would happen in a case like that?
Good question. Don't know. Does the king keep it, or does it go back? My first inclination is to say that it goes back to the ancestral family, but I don't know. Need to look it up. Okay, that's a piece of homework. Who wants to do that homework? You do, Hannah. Right, that's your homework, Hannah, for next week. Find out the answer to your question. Let's carry on in the Rambam. We've only got a couple of minutes left. And in all the wars, the treasure houses of the kings go to the king, like we've just said in the Gemara. Ushar habizah, and the rest of the spoils, bozazin, v'notnin lefanav, they give it in front of the king. V'hu notel mechza barosh, he takes the first half, whatever he wants. Umachsita bizah cholkinota, and the other half they separate, they share it out. Kol anshei hatzava, all the men of the army, biyachad, together with ha'am hayoshvim al hakelim b'machaneh l'shomram cholkin b'shaveh. Those people who are sitting guarding the kelim. What are the kelim? The weaponry.
Weapons of war.
Weapons of war. So those that are back in the camp on guard duty, they share b'shaveh, in equal share. So the combat soldiers and the guards get it. And as Hannah quite rightly quoted, the Rambam quotes Shmuel Aleph. See, Hannah and the Rambam are on the same page, even though Rambam's a rationalist. Shmuel Aleph, he quotes, and there it is on the screen for you. I'll just take off the blue because it makes it easier to read if I take off the blue. This is exactly as Hannah said when he came back from Ziklag, having rescued his kidnapped wives. David rescued all that the Amalekites had taken, and David rescued his 2 wives, and there was nothing missing to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, nor anything which they'd taken to themselves. David recovered everything. And David took all the sheep and the cattle. They led before those cattle and said, this is David's spoil. Everything is put before David. And David came to the 200 men who had refrained from going after David and had stationed them at the brook Besor. And they came out toward David and toward the people who were with him. And David approached the people. These are the guards, 200 guards he left behind. And then every evil and unscrupulous of the men who had gone with David. So the greedy combat soldiers said, they didn't go out with me. Let us not give them of the spoil we have rescued. But each man and his wife and his children, and let them lead away and depart. Off you go. Says the greedy combat soldiers, they don't deserve anything. We're the ones that did the fighting. And David said, no, 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 no. Do not do so, my brethren, with that which the Lord has given us, and he guarded us and delivered the troop which came upon us into our hand. And who will listen to you concerning this matter? As the share from him goes down into the battle, so is the share of him who stays with the luggage. It says luggage, it means the kalim, that means the guarding the weaponry. And they shall share alike. Listen, look at verse 25. This is the important verse. Vayehi hayom ahu v'mala, and it was from that day forth. Vayisimea lechok, he made it into a law. Ulamishpat liYisrael ad hayom hazeh. That is the law. Those soldiers who stay behind guarding stuff are considered equal to those who go out to combat. That's the end of that story there in Ziklag, which Hannah quite correctly quoted, and the Rambam quotes there. So let's just finish this little piece of Gemarah here. I thought we might get to the Mishnah, but it doesn't look like we will. But let's just finish this a little bit. So when it says la'am here, to the people, it doesn't mean all the people. It means the combat soldiers and the guards. Amalei abai la Rav Dimi, v'amra li la Racha. Abaya said to Rav Dimi, and some say it was to Rav Acha, Bishlama otrot lamalechim lamelech orcha demilta. I understand why the treasures of the king go to the king, but that's the way it should be. How do you learn it from? That half goes to the king and half goes to the people. And he quotes a pasuk, not our pasuk that we just did in Shmuel Aleph, but he quotes a pasuk from Divrei Hayamim, which we will do next week because we've run out of time and I need to go. So we will finish off there, and next week we'll just finish off this last little bit of this Gemarah, and then we'll talk about this Mishnah coming up, which, as I said right at the beginning, starts to talk about the concept of having lots of wives and in the context of a king. So that will be, please God, for next week. There's no reason why we shouldn't do it next week, is there? It's Yom Yerushalayim, I think, but I don't think that that interferes with anything.
Monday, Shamir.
What day are we? Oh, it's Wednesday. I thought it was Monday today. Yeah, I don't know what day it is. Yes, no reason why we shouldn't learn next Wednesday.
Don't forget to go for the baby then if you're not sure what day it is.
You're right. You know, I dare say I'll be pointed in the right direction. Okay, let's stop.